Speaker Stephen Collins is a professor at Pikes Peak State College. His areas of specialty include American history, particularly the history of American public address and free speech issues from colonial times to the present. Stephen is an actor, singer, and dancer, as well as an avid student of theology. He and his wife are lifetime members of the Highlands Ranch Historical Society, and his program is about the trial that was the basis for the freedom of speech bill. Please welcome Stephen Collins.
Okay, can you all hear me fine? Okay, good. The trial of John Peter Zenger, 1735. This is one of the most interesting cases almost nobody has ever heard about. And so we are going to change that tonight. All right. I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself, since some of you may not know me very well. I have a bachelor's degree in engineering physics from Colorado School of Mines, where I met my lovely wife. I also have a master's in communication from Colorado State University. I have a PhD in communication from Northwestern University, where I studied rhetorical theory in the time of Shakespeare and Queen Elizabeth I in Tudor England. And my professors were experts on speeches in American history, so it became a real secondary and important focus for me. My last degree is a Master's in Divinity from Iowa School of Theology, which I got around 2011. So I'm a bit across the board in terms of my interests. My wife and I teach ballroom dance, and I'm a puppeteer, and I like to do a lot of shows. Performed locally for the Wesley Players at St. Luke's United Methodist Church. So, the trial of John Peter Zenger. Well, I could have called this the trial of who? Because again, almost nobody knows who this is. And so, I'm going to name a few of the players, and then I want to go into some of the background of the world at the time to set up why this trial is so unique. This right here is the colonial governor of New York, and he's an absolute pisspot. He's about the most unethical character you could ever imagine, and if you could say anything negative about the government, you would say it about him. He's our villain, he's our bad guy. This is Lewis Morris, who is in charge of the courts. He is the Chief Justice of the court system in New York in the 1730s, until he's essentially pushed out by our villain. He is then replaced by another Chief Justice by the name of James Delancey. And this person here, Andrew Hamilton, not to be confused with Alexander Hamilton, is the hero of the story, if there is one, beyond the printer in question by the name of John P. Zenger. It's called the Zenger trial. Oh, by the way, let me just point this out. Andrew Hamilton is famous for being not only a lawyer, but the person who helps design Independence Hall in Philadelphia. He worked with an architect, but he was the head of the Pennsylvania legislature, and he sort of guides the vision of what Independence Hall should be. So when you think of everyone's standing around and arguing over the Declaration of Independence and signing it famously, it's taking place in this building, and that's part of Andrew Hamilton's fame. We have no picture of John Peter Zenger. And it sort of surprised me, but it doesn't surprise me. Part of the reason we don't have a picture of him is he just wasn't wealthy enough. There was still a sort of a class structure, and he's a mere printer. You know, you've got pictures of his lawyer, Andrew Hamilton, but we don't have a picture of John Peter Zenger. We don't know what he looked like. However, I would like to suggest that maybe he is someone who we might know from a TV show called The Green Acres. And I'll tell you why in a moment. There's not been a really good drama done, like a biopic, of this trial. But in 1952, I think it was CBS, Westinghouse Studio, Studio One, did an hour-long movie about John Peter Zenger. It was 1952, and it ran on early television sets. The Trial of John Peter Zenger, starring Eddie Albert of Green Acres fame. So for our purpose tonight, since we don't have a picture of who this guy is, let's just assume that John Peter Zenger looks like Eddie Albert. Okay, so we just can't do any better. By the way, if you do want to watch this 1952 broadcast, just type in the trial of John Peter Zenger. What do they call it? Yeah, the trial of John Peter Zenger, and you can watch it on YouTube. It is out there. Okay, it's not bad. So, all right. So this trial is going to be famous in American history, even though almost no one's ever heard about it, at least in our generation. But everybody at the time heard about it, and they heard about it all through the 18th century during the War for Independence. This is famous for them. Now, to set this up, I need to go wildly off track and start talking about a Christian rhetoric manual designed to convert Indians in the Americas, written by Diego de Valdez in 1579. This is going to sound very odd, but we have to understand how people saw the cosmos at the time, because this is really going to affect how we see the country and how we see issues of libel in the colonies. What is famous about this book, which has a very odd title, I mean, it's Rhetorica Christiana ad concudiande et orandi usum accommodata utresque, etc., etc. In English, it comes across as Christian rhetoric adapted to the practice of preaching and prayer, with examples of both faculties inserted in their place, which indeed are taken from the histories of Indians, which besides learning, take comparable pleasure. I just put it up there so you're more confused. The book is famous for having the single best depiction of the great chain of being that was ever put into a book. The great chain of being essentially is what you acknowledged if the Earth was the center of the solar system. And right out there at the very edge of the heavens was God and the prime mobile. And then you had a sort of a hierarchy of archangels, angels, seraphims, cherubs, king, lords, nobles, merchants, artisans, peasants, and then the animal kingdom. And there was this hierarchy of order. And it's never been depicted better than it was in this Christian rhetoric manual of the 1570s. You can actually see a chain in here linking it all together. That's why it's known as the great chain of being. I'll zoom in on this portion by portion. So here's God at the top, and angels and archangels, and here is Jesus depicted. And as you work down to the angels, you get to the world of humans, and then below humans you have the other animals in order of sort of a hierarchy, and then you have the earth and the plants, and then if you were having a really bad life, you ended up at the center of the earth in hell, and it wasn't a good experience. That was their view of the cosmos. Now, how many of you know what a fractal is? A fractal is a pattern that when you zoom in on it, you keep seeing the same pattern repeated. And no matter how much you magnify it, 100 times, 1,000, 1,000,000 times, you'll always see the same pattern because it's repeated. That's really what they thought in the 16th century. And they believed that this great chain of being was almost an instruction manual put there by God. If you wanted to know how to behave, well, you obey person above you. The person above you is supposed to take care of you if you do your due obedience. And they would say that noble is to king as wife is to husband, as child is to parent, as merchant is to lord, as lower animal is to higher animal, as worker bee is to queen bee. By the way, the reason it was called a queen bee is because at the time they were coming up with the theory of bees. They saw it as a microcosm of society in Tudor England. And since you had a queen ruling, they decided that the head bee was going to be called the queen bee. But they believed this was God ordaining a hierarchy. And even though people are only at one level, there really was a hierarchy of people. By the way, this was also used as a moral justification for slavery. I, as the master, take care of you. You, as the obedient slave, appreciate me and obey me, and everything works fine. It organized all of society. God made it that way. Don't mess with it. You need to understand that thinking before we get to the John Peter Zenger case. Another way the best description of what happens if it goes bad actually comes out of Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida, which was first printed in 1609. There's rumor it might not have even been performed by Shakespeare's company. It might have had one private performance, but basically it didn't get performed much in Shakespeare's time at all. There may have been one performance at a theater. But in it, it's the story of the siege of Troy by the Greeks. And one of the characters in it, by the name of Ulysses, which is the Latinized version of Odysseus. There's a great Odysseus film coming out, The Odyssey, I think this summer. Can't wait to go see it. In it, Ulysses gives a speech about why everything is getting screwed up. Because the Greeks aren't succeeding. They're sort of in a quagmire outside of Troy. And Ulysses is just so angry at the Greeks for screwing up the order of the hierarchy. So you'll get an idea of why this is bad, because he's explaining why bad things are happening to the Greeks. I'll read you his monologue here. And look, how many Grecian tents do stand hollow upon this plain, so many hollow factions. When that the general is not like the hive, there's that sort of recognition of another part of the chain giving you guidance. When that the general is not like the hive, to whom the forager shall all repair what honey is expected. Degree being visited, the unworthiest show as fairly in the mask. The heavens themselves, the planets, and this center observe degree, priority and place, insisture, course, proportion, season, form, office and custom, in all line of order, and therefore is the glorious planet soul in noble eminence, enthroned and sphered amidst the other, whose medicinable eye corrects the ill aspect of planets evil, and puts like the commandment of a king, songs check to good and bad. But when the planets in evil mixture to disorder wander, what plagues and portents, what mutiny, what raging of the seal, shaking of the earth, commotion in the winds, frights, changes, horrors, divert and crack, rend and deracinate, which means essentially to uproot. The unity and married calm of states quite from their fixture. Oh, when degree is shaped, when the ladder to all high designs, which is the ladder to all high designs, then enterprise is sick. How could communities, degrees in schools, and brotherhoods in cities, peaceful commerce from dividable shore, the primogenitive and due of birth, prerogative of age, crown, scepters, laurels, but by degree, stand in authentic place? Take but degree away, untune that string, and hark what discord follows. Each thing meets in mere oppugnancy. The bounded waters should lift their bosoms higher than the shores and make a sop of all this solid globe. Strength should be the lord of imbecility, and the rude son should strike his father dead. Force should be right, or rather right and wrong, between whose endless jar justice resides. Should lose their names, and so should justice too. That everything includes itself in power, power into must make perforce a universal prey, and last eat up himself. He's turning to his co-general there, great Agamemnon. This chaos when degree is suffocant, follows the choking, and this neglection of degree, it is that by a pace goes backward with a purpose it hath to climb. The general's disdained by him one step below, he by the next. In other words, there's a cascade effect of disorder happening through the hierarchy. So every step exampled by the first pace that is sick of his superior grows to an envious fever of pale and bloodless emulation. And 'tis this fever that keeps Troy on foot, not her own sinews. To end a tale of length, Troy in our weakness stands, not in her strength. That's a complex way to say it, but Shakespeare said it more elaborately than anybody. You have one problem with one part of the hierarchy, and it will spread like a poison through the rest of the hierarchy. That view, you keep thinking Elizabethan times are before the U.S., but keep in mind that Elizabeth was alive when Raleigh was over here on these shores. That one of the reasons Virginia, the first colony, is named Virginia is after the Virgin Queen. No one's going to tell Elizabeth she's not a virgin, and so they named the land after her, Virginia, to keep her happy. Okay? And right after, who do you get? James. So they named the place in Virginia Jamestown. This coincides with Shakespeare, the founding of our country. Now, undermining this view of the cosmos with earth here, hell underneath it, and the heavens above, is a multi-century process, beginning with someone like Nicholas Copernicus, who is a Polish astronomer who in 1543 publishes the De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium, which in English is On the Revolution of Celestial Spheres. He posits not a geocentric view of the universe, of the solar system, but a heliocentric one, where everything goes around the sun. This sort of stays in the backwaters for a while, but then you get Galileo Galilei, who in January of 1610 points this brand new fangled telescope up at the heavens and looks at Jupiter. He might have started in December, but he actually, starting on the 7th of January, began to note that these dots kept appearing around the moon, but they never stayed in the same place. This blew open the scientific revolution because he had discovered 4 moons, Callisto, Ganymede, Io, and Europa. He discovered moons that were not rotating around Earth. They were rotating around something else. This got him in trouble with the Catholic Church for multiple centuries. They then apologized to him long after his death. This gave credence to Copernicus. So you also start to see around this time someone by the name of John Locke, who is starting to look at the idea that there isn't a social hierarchy, that in nature we're all equal. And this is again going to undermine this great chain of being. And he says in his second treatise on government, to understand political power right and derive from its original, we must consider what state all men are naturally in, and that is a state of perfect freedom to order their actions and dispose of their possessions and persons as they think fit, within the bounds of the law of nature, without asking leave or depending upon the will of any other man. We are all equal here. Also a state of equality wherein all the power and jurisdiction is reciprocal, no one having more than another, there being nothing more evident than that creatures of the same species and rank, promiscuously born unto all the same advantages of nature, and the use of the same faculties, should also be equal amongst another without subordination or subjection, unless the Lord and Master of them all should, by any manifest declaration of his will, set one above the other, and confer on him by an evident and clear appointment an undoubted right to dominion and sovereignty. But this idea that we are equal without subordination and subjection shatters the great chain of being. Now again, this is a long-standing idea. It's not going to just change overnight. But all of these things are happening at this time as we approach our American history. Here is the first copy of the Declaration of Independence. It's not the fancy one that they stole in National Treasure. That is one signed later. They took the draft that they voted on July 2nd. They voted for independence on July 2nd. They took it to the printer, who then distributed copies of this that were quickly sent around the colonies, and it was first read publicly on July 4th. This is the original Declaration of Independence, one of the broadsides. And there's that line right in the middle of it, right here. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And that again is building off of John Locke, but it's starting to undermine that view of the great chain of being. Now this is 1776. There's that wonderful little phrase. So the one other thing I want to talk about now is equity. The court system in 1735, pretty much the history of the courts anywhere in the world, in the Western world, starting with Mesopotamia, deals with what do you do when there is certain people in society are not as in good a shape as others. And they practice what they called equity, and they had what are known as equity courts. We hear today controversies going on about diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, and you'll hear people just really get upset about equity, but they all use equity. Equity is about the oldest concept in law. And I'm telling you why for a reason. You go back to the earliest law manual that is still extant, the laws of Ur-Nama, from 2100 BCE, and you'll see that there is concern for the people that are disadvantaged in a court. He boasts, I am going to be a great leader and a very just one, and I did not deliver the orphan to the rich. I did not deliver the widow to the mighty. That idea is going to be very important in the law system. Law Code of Hammurabi doesn't identify the widow and the orphan, but it has a similar idea, and this is about 500 years after the Law Code of Ur-Nammu. The pious prince, I am, Hammurabi, who venerates the gods to make justice prevail in the land, to abolish the wicked and evil, to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak. If you happen to come from a Christian tradition, you'll see it in Exodus. You shall not wrong or oppress a resident alien, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. You shall not abuse any widow or orphan. You also see it in Matthew, in one of the two great commandments in chapter 22, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, this idea of equity. You also see it famously by Abraham Lincoln in his second inaugural address, where he says, with malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle and for his widow and orphan, to do all things which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. The reason why I need to mention equity is designed to help people who don't have the power to and the wealth to use the justice system to their benefit. What happened is rulers that wanted to take care of the widow and orphan, because they saw it in scripture, they saw it in previous law codes, set up courts that took shortcuts, known as courts of equity, to help the people that would just get crushed by the system. was founded by Henry VII in England in the late 15th century, and it was called the Star Chamber. How many of you ever heard of the Star Chamber? A Star Chamber now is seen as a very abusive kangaroo court that's designed to crush political enemies. By cutting corners and not having to go through all of the process everybody would go through, you made it easier for the poor and the weak to find justice. The problem is it quickly got abused. If you didn't have to go through the proper systems, you could also go after your political enemies. So a lot of the courts of equity began to get abused. During the time of Henry VIII, he used it to go after all his enemies. And the term Star Chamber became the term generally known for a really corrupt court. Well, they happen to have these in New York. And good old William Cosby, the villain of our story, who is the governor, began to try and take things through equity courts instead of the more traditional common law courts. That's why I needed to set that up for you. Now I need to give you a timeline here of what is happening. You need to know something about New York as a colony. In 1609, Henry Hudson claims the region for the Dutch. As a result of Henry Hudson claiming this, he also gave us the name for New York's metropolitan area 4th Municipal Airport, otherwise known as the Hudson. That's okay, watch the movie Sully. Okay. In 1626, New Amsterdam is established on the island of Manhattan. The Dutch then, in 1664, surrendered to the English, and the English named New Amsterdam, New York. Now that shouldn't surprise us a lot. The Dutch knew this, so I think this is essentially going to happen, because the English have Boston, the English have Philadelphia, the English have the Chesapeake, and sitting there in this uneasy sandwich between all of the English colonies is the Dutch. So the English move in, surround Manhattan with warships, and the Dutch just concede. Okay. So that gets us through 1664. John Zenger is born in Germany in 1697. Zenger, when he's 13 years old, comes to New York as an apprentice printer to William Bradford, who is going to print the other paper in New York during his lifetime. Zenger in 1726 starts his own printing business. He's breaking out on his own. He's done his apprenticeship. August 1st, 1732, William Cosby arrives in New York 13 months after being appointed governor. It took him a long time to get there, but he got there. Soon afterwards, he tries to sue a man by the name of Rip Van Dam for half the salary he earned as interim governor through equity jurisprudence. Chief Justice Lewis Morris sold the center on the 3-judge New York Supreme Court, blocks Cosby's efforts. So what's happening is Cosby in England gets appointed. Meanwhile, you need a governor in the colony to take care of things until he gets over here. Cosby then gets over here, those several months later, and goes, hey, I want half your salary for filling in for me until I got here. Van Dam says, I'm not giving you half my salary. Probably a little more to the time, I'm not giving ye half of my salary. It goes to this Supreme Court to be worked out, and the Chief Justice blocks it. Now, I don't know the details of one blocking it out of 3, but he blocks it. This really upsets Cosby, who wanted half of the other guy's pay for doing his job for that period of time. And so what happens is Cosby then removes Chief Justice Morris, who's been the Chief Justice for 20 years and done a dang good job, and kicks him out and replaces him by this guy, James Delancey, who is a real good friend and supporter of him. He's putting his political friends in power. Then, Lewis Morris, who's now been sort of dumped off the Supreme Court, he and 2 other lawyers, James Alexander and William Smith, they decide they're going it, called the New York Weekly Journal, printed by John Peter Zenger to counter the state-controlled New York Gazette, which was in the pocket of William Cosby. The New York Weekly Journal openly criticizes Cosby. This makes Cosby upset. There's a page from one of these weekly journals. In the fall of 1732, going into 1733, Governor Cosby tries to sue, I've already said that, pardon me, I'm going down my timeline. January 1734, Justice Delancey fails to get a grand jury indictment against Zenger for seditious libel. He's upset about what's being printed, and he tries to get a grand jury to indict him. Well, the grand jury doesn't like Cosby either, and they go, no. And so, he fails at it. So he tries again in October of the same year. A second grand jury fails to indict Zenger. Cosby is pulling his hair out. He wants to get rid of this guy who keeps printing bad things about him. Then, October 17th, 1734, the popularly elected New York Council, sort of like a borough council for the cities that runs everything, okay, they meet without the Morris faction, the Lewis Morris, who is the former Chief Justice. And that faction, they were known as Morrisites. They included Rip Van Dam, the person that Cosby was suing to get half his pay, the lawyer James Alexander, and Abraham Van Horn. And he votes to ask the New York Colonial Assembly to burn publicly offensive issues of the New York Weekly Journal. They don't like Cosby either. 5 days later, they refuse to do it. Cosby like, because he wants to try and broaden the hatred and the legitimacy of his views of Zenger and Morris and that faction. So, the New York Council, and by the way, we've seen this dirty trick ourselves, right? Where a group holds a meeting but doesn't invite the opposing faction. Oh, did you get the email? We were having a meeting yesterday. You know that dirty trick, right? It's got a history. So they do it with even one less member. They have a meeting on November 2nd of 1734, and the New York Council, with only 8 members present, orders the sheriff of New York to apprehend Zenger for seditious libel. Now it's going to take him a little while to do this. In the meantime, the sheriff on November 6th, 4 days later, will ask the popularly elected Court of Quarter Sessions, which is a sub-court in New York, to burn issues of the New York Weekly Journal. They refuse to do it. The sheriff and the Cosby appointees instead burn the offensive New York Weekly Journal issues themselves. And there's a picture of this from a history magazine in 1908 showing the burning of Zenger's Weekly Journal. November 6, 1734. It's hard to see, so I've made you a bigger picture here. This was the city hall where everything happened, including the jail, the courts, and the seat of government. And you can see that when they decided to put someone in stocks, they did it right outside the court. And so right out here publicly where justice is meted out, they burned these terrible journals that spoke negatively about Cosby. Timeline continued. Right down here. November 17th, the sheriff gets around to it and arrests John Peter Zenger. For several days, he was then denied the use of pen, ink, and paper and the liberty of speech with any persons. He wasn't allowed to speak to anybody. He was put in jail, wasn't allowed to have any visitors, contact a lawyer, or do anything. Violation of his due process. Okay? And by the way, when I quote these lines, these are coming from an account of the trial printed the year after the trial finished. So, it comes time to set bail for him when he's eventually allowed to see a lawyer and to proceed. And it was set at 400 pounds. His worth was 40. This is 10 times Zenger's net worth. And despite his attorneys, James Alexander and William Smith, citing English law precedent against excessive bail. Excessive bail is going to show up later. We've heard that term, haven't we? They set it at 10 times. Imagine you live in Highlands Ranch and you print something somebody doesn't like, and they set the bail at 10 times the worth of your assets. There's no way in heck you can get out of jail. Notice how long he's stuck in jail. On January 28, 1735, this is the last day of the judicial term. They sort of do terms and then they sort of dissolve. And with no grand jury indictment, because no grand jury will go anywhere near this, Zenger's expected to be released. The court's going to expire. And then at the last moment, he's not. Instead, he is charged with an information. This is an informal legal term of the time. For journals 13 and 23, which are deemed false, scandalous, malicious, and seditious. An information is what the government can do if it can't get a grand jury. It's that court of equity, which is supposed to get rid of red tape and help the poor, but it can be manipulated by the people in power. And since a grand jury won't do anything, we'll do an information which allows us to arrest him and hold him. And so on the very last day, when he's expecting to go free, they pull an information, charge him, and keep him in jail. Notice, he sits there for almost 3 months until the first day of the new judicial term, and Zenger's arraignment is about to happen. Zenger's lawyer, they're mad about this. They question the legitimacy of Chief Justice James Delaney's appointment and his co-judge, sort of in a subordinate position, James Frederick Phillips, and the legitimacy of removing the previous Chief Justice Lewis Morris in August of 1773. They're going for the jugular. We're going to say you have no right to do this because you weren't properly appointed. Chief Justice James Delancey doesn't like this, so guess what he does? On April 16th, he charges Zenger's lawyers with contempt and disbars them. Boom! You're out of there. 2 days later, they ask for a clarification. Is that just for the trial or as lawyers in general? As lawyers for all time. You're never allowed to practice law anymore. Drop kick. This is abuse of the system. And everybody in New York is getting angry about this. Because this guy's in the pocket of Cosby, the governor. He has no lawyer. He does something unusual. He asks for counsel to be appointed. Understand, having the right to counsel is not a Supreme Court decision in the U.S. until like the 1950s or 60s. I can't remember the exact date. But you're not, it's a luxury. But they are feeling slightly bad that they just kicked off the 2 lawyers that he had, who were good lawyers. So they appoint one for him, who's a friend of Cosby. Now, so he gets this guy by the name of John Chambers, supporter of Governor Cosby, appointed as his lawyer. Chambers requests a day to select a jury and start the trial. Chambers, like most lawyers of the time, didn't like Zenger, but because he's been picked, he's going to do the job honorably. This is going to be a bit of a surprise, I think, to Cosby and to the Chief Justice Delancey. So jury selection of a struck jury from the Freeholders book commences on July 29th. Let me tell you what a struck jury is. They have a book of freeholders, meaning this is a record of who votes and who owns property. We pull 48 names out of it, bring them in, and then go, nope, 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 you're okay, nope, you're okay, nope, nope, nope. Called a struck jury because people are struck out of it. And what you end up with is the remaining 12. So a struck jury is a good thing. But instead of selecting 48 persons who are adult male property owners and voters from the book, the court clerk, a Cosby appointee, suddenly produces his own list of 48 potential jurors. it turns out that some of them aren't even property holders. Okay? They're men that are holding commissions and appointments at the governor's pleasure, and also included in this list is the governor's baker, his tailor, his shoemaker, his candle maker, his joiner. This is cherry-picked! John Chambers, to his credit, says essentially, like heck this is going to happen. And he turns around and says, this better be legitimate. And on the next day, one day later, John Chambers demands that the struck jury come from the freeholder's book entirely. The court acquiesces. Then the trial begins, August 4th. Chambers declares his client, John Peter Zenger, to be not guilty. And then it's so mellowly said. And then Mr. Hamilton, Andrew Hamilton, who at the request of some of my friends was so kind to come up from Philadelphia to assist me on the trial, spoke. On the day of the trial, as they're starting, and there's John Chambers, in through the door bursts Andrew Hamilton and essentially says, I will represent my client, John Peter Zenger. He's the most famous lawyer in Philadelphia, and even the Chief Justice is intimidated by him. And it's like, wow, now we got this star power. So Chambers stays there, but star power just walked in the door. And then the star power speaks in New York City Hall, Old City Hall, in 1735. And here's what he says. Catches everybody off guard. I'll save Mr. Attorney, meaning the Attorney General for the prosecution, the trouble of examining his witnesses, and I do, for my client, confess that he both printed and published the two newspapers set forth in the information, the charge, and I hope in so doing he's committed no crime. He's just admitted his client was guilty. And I wonder what Zenger's doing. Excuse me? Did you Mr. Attorney is taken aback and he says, well, Richard Bradley, then if Your Honor pleases, since Mr. Hamilton has confessed the fact, I think our witnesses may be discharged. We have no further occasion for them. And they let all the witnesses go because he's just admitted guilt. Now, by the way, in this case of libel, the jury only has to determine if he printed it. At that time, the only one with the wisdom to decide if that's libel is the more educated, societally high judge. So the judge will decide libel, but because he's a friend to Cosby, you know he's going to. Jury just has to show he printed it. Judge will determine libel and sentence Zenger. And the way the book describes it, and there was silence in the court for some time. What the heck just happened? Mr. Attorney says, indeed, sir, as Mr. Hamilton has confessed the printing and publishing these libels, I think the jury must find a verdict for the king. For supposing they were true, the law says that they are not the less libelous for that. Nay, indeed, the law says their being true is an aggravation of the crime. Pay attention to that. This is the great chain of being. If I make a false accusation that the governor was having an affair with William Smith's wife, I've hurt the governor by saying that. But if it's a lie, it'll only hurt him that much. If it turns out that it's true, and the governor really is having an affair with William Smith's wife, that's going to hurt more. So the truth would result in a bigger penalty than a falsehood, because you've damaged God's hierarchy ordained more with a true statement that's critical than a false statement. This is why it is so weird, and you can see the remnants of this great chain of being in our early American history. Mr. Hamilton then essentially says, not so fast! He didn't just do this for a reason, just to declare him guilty. Not so, neither, Mr. Attorney. There are two words to that bargain. I hope it is not our bare printing and publishing a paper that will make a libel. You will have something more to do before you make my client a libeler. For the words themselves must be libelous, that is, false, scandalous, and seditious, or we are not guilty. That's not going to go over too well. And the Attorney General says, if this was not a libel, he did not know what one was. What was one? You've heard that phrase. Well, if this isn't a problem, then I don't know what is. That phrase goes back several centuries. So, Mr. Chambers then, still as the assistant attorney for Zenger, sums up how the Mr. Attorney, has not proved that Zenger proves printing was false, scandalous, and seditious. And they're going to go back and forth on this. And Hamilton will argue with Mr. Attorney over whether something that is true is libel. And they'll spend about 10 pages in this book going over whether truth is libel or not, or only falsehood. And Mr. Hamilton says, well, I can prove that these libelous statements were true. The judge is not going to have any of this. You're not going to criticize the governor in this trial. He says, you cannot be admitted, Mr. Hamilton, to give the truth of the libel in evidence. A libel is not to be justified, for it is nevertheless a libel that it is true. I don't care what it is. If it's true or not, it's still libel. I'm not going to let you destroy my patron who put me in this job. Now we get to the conclusion, which is perhaps the most quoted part of this trial. Mr. Hamilton says, but to conclude, these are the words that form the foundation of freedom in the United States in terms of free speech. The question before the court, and you gentlemen of the court, is not a small or private concern. He's talking to the jury. It is not the cause of a poor printer, nor of New York alone, which you are now trying. No, it may in its consequence affect every freeman that lives under a British government on the main of America. It is the best cause. It is the cause of liberty. And I make no doubt but your upright conduct this day will not only entitle you to the love and esteem of your fellow citizens, but every man who prefers freedom to a life of slavery will bless and honor you as men who have baffled the attempt of tyranny, and by an impartial and uncorrupt verdict have laid a noble foundation for securing to ourselves, our posterity, and our neighbors that to which nature and the laws of our country have given us a right, the liberty both of exposing and opposing arbitrary power in these parts of the world, at least by speaking and writing truth. You hear that phrase, speak truth to power? There it is. Now you get a description of what the attorney does in return. Here Mr. Attorney observed that Mr. Hamilton had gone very much out of the way and had made himself and the people very merry, but that he had been citing cases not at all to the purpose. Everything you say is irrelevant. All that the jury had to consider was Mr. Zenger's printing and publishing these two scandalous libels, which very highly reflected on His Excellency, the governor, and principal men concerned in the administration of this government, which is confessed. He's already confessed. All you have to do is prove he printed them. Forget everything else this Hamilton guy keeps blowing at you. And therefore he made no doubt that the jury would find the defendant guilty. How could they do otherwise? He admitted the guilt and would refer to the court for their direction, because again the judge determines the libel. Chief Justice doesn't want to be left out on this. He's going to have his own few cents at the end of this. And so he says, gentlemen of the jury, the great pains, Mr. Oh, you know what? I also do puppets. And this, I got this at Goodwill a while ago. It's one of those scarves. I'm going to have a little fun with this. Because this scarf just reminds me of what a judge's wig must be like. I do not like this guy. Gentlemen of the jury,
The great pains Mr. Hamilton has taken. My wings are falling off. I hope he had a bad day with it. The great pains Mr. Hamilton has taken to show how little regard juries are to pay to the opinion of some judges in trials of this kind is done without doubt, with no doubt, with the design that you should take but very little notice of what I should say on this occasion. You need to listen to me. I'm important.
He then goes on to say,
I shall therefore only observe to you that, as the facts of the word and the information are confessed, the only thing that can come into question before you is whether the words are set forth in the information make a libel.
and then he quotes another judge.
And that is a matter of law, no doubt, in which you should leave to the court. In other words, butt out.
Here's where he quotes that judge.
For it is of necessity for all governments that the people should have a good opinion of it. And nothing can be worse to any government than to endeavor to procure animosities. And as to the management of it, this has been always looked upon as a crime, and no government can be safe without it be punished.
Hamilton then, I don't know how he does it with a straight face. Oh, Your Honor, I humbly beg Your Honor's pardon. I'm very much misapprehended if you suppose what I said was so designed. He knows darn well what he said was going to upset the judge. Then the jury withdrew. And in a small amount of time, this is the wording in the document from 1736, in a small time returned, and being asked by the clerk whether they were agreed of their verdict and whether John Peter Zenger was guilty of printing and publishing the libels and the information mentioned, they answered by Thomas Hunt, their foreman. Can I have a drum roll, please? Not guilty. Upon which there were 3 huzzahs in the hall. Yes, huzzahs. Huzzah! Huzzah! Because nobody in Manhattan liked this judge, liked Cosby, and the whole place erupted in favor of Zenger. Upon which, the next day, I was discharged from my imprisonment. It's interesting they kept him another night. I don't know why. Just because they were probably ticked off. There's the hall. This famous building. By the way, anytime anybody then, after this and through the Revolutionary period, got the better of the British or defeated the British in a battle or defeated the British in another court case, they would raise a glass to Andrew Hamilton. Or they would raise one to Peter Zenger. This was the salute whenever they got the better of the British. It really fanned the flames of dissent. 54 years later, in 1789, see these little windows on the side? They would build a portico in front of it. Just compare them. See the windows on the side, these sets of 2 and 2, 2 and 2? Then you see that there they are, 2 and 2, 2 and 2. But they built a patio that extended out. Anybody know what picture that is? Somebody very important standing on the deck with his hand on a Bible. George Washington, taking the oath of office, April 30th, 1789. The first power seat of government was New York for 17 months. They probably picked this building because it was functionally the government building in town and the biggest. But you know that as Washington is doing this, He's remembering the history of this building and the freedoms that came out of it. Our first seat of government takes place where Zenger won the most important free speech case in American history. By 1812, it was sold for under $500, 500 pounds, I think, at the time. I don't remember when we moved to dollars. To a man who tore the building down and put up a new building. They didn't appreciate history like we do today. So they put in this building, which has a statue of Washington in front. You can go see it, by the way. Hold on a second. We are currently in Highlands Ranch. And so here we are. Say hello to us. There we are in our building. I love to do this without labels because I think it's more fun to see the country. Here we are in our little building right here. We're going to zoom out and we are going to zoom over to New York, and we're going to zoom in on New York on the island of Manhattan. And here on the island of Manhattan, right here, surrounded by all these big skyscrapers, is this little bitty tiny building right there. And that is Federal Hall. And if we come in on it, that is a 2024 picture of Federal Hall. The statue of George Washington. By the way, the reason the scaffolding is up is because the foundations were beginning to wear out after a couple of centuries. They found 4-foot gaps between the foundation and the soil. And they eventually poured liquid concrete in it and essentially jacked it up like they jack up your driveway. This, by the way, if you're any of your National Treasure fans, if you are, and you were to look down Wall Street to this church 1 block away, this is the church where all the treasure is buried under Trinity Church in National Treasure, at the corner of Wall and Broadway. It's only 1 block away. But I really want to go see that church, that building. I haven't gone since I discovered this, but I really want to see this building. It's now a dedicated museum. They have a portion of the floor that George Washington was standing on when he took the oath of office. Okay, let's close this down. And here we are back at Federal Hall. What are the impacts of the Zenger trial? Check my time, I'm doing okay here. It promoted free speech. It legitimized dissent. Because if he could do it, now everybody felt they could do it. Like, this really sort of opened the Pandora's box, or the can of worms, pick your image. It began to shift the definition of libel. The laws didn't change immediately. It would take 50 or so years for us to start writing new laws. But after this case, nobody brought a case of libel for ever telling a truth. From then on, they just didn't bring it because they didn't think they would win it. They only brought it for falsehoods. It also promoted jury nullification. Andrew Hamilton essentially said, hey, jury, I know I just told you he's guilty. Ignore that. Find him not guilty. Ignore the judge and the prosecutor. Even though I said he's guilty, I want you to call him not guilty, because what is the good of having freedom if we can't speak truth to power? By the way, if you want to get a jury duty and they ask you questions to say, oh, I want to be on a jury, I love juries. I love studying the law. My favorite case is the trial of John Peter Zenger. And either judge or either attorney will go, I don't want him. Because you are not allowed to tell a jury you can ignore all instructions. You'll be disbarred today if you do that. But judges aren't allowed to tell them. And attorneys will get disbarred if they tell a jury you can ignore all the instructions. But they can. They just can't be told by someone in the court. But if you know Zenger, I've just got you out of jury duty. It also heavily influenced the Bill of Rights, and I mean heavily. The reason I went into that timeline in so much depth is to give you a lot of background into the 5 out of 10 amendments it's going to influence in the Bill of Rights. Keep in mind, when they passed the Constitution, mainly Federalists, they didn't put in a lot of rights, and a lot of anti-Federalists like Patrick Henry played hell over this and said, you've got to preserve our rights. They said, all right, do us a favor, ratify the Constitution, get this, on our honor as gentlemen, we'll immediately change it. And they were honorable. They kept that. And they changed it, and they made 10 changes called the amendments. The ones that Zenger influenced, first of all, First Amendment, freedom of speech. Second, Fifth Amendment, due process. You just can't throw me in jail and keep me there for months. Sixth Amendment, speedy and public trial. You just wanted to throw away the key and not bring up the charges against me. Seventh Amendment, trial by jury. Now keep in mind, a court of equity got around the jury system by saying, look, widow and orphan, you're having a hard time, so you can just make your case to the judge, we'll cut through all the red tape, and we'll make sure that you're protected. But the problem is the corrupt people in power saw it as a way not to have to deal with the public and the juries, which hated Cosby and hated Delancey, the chief judge. So we'll do this equity thing where you only talk to the judge. And they decided in the colonial times, we don't like that. Court of equity is a bunch of BS. We want trial by jury. And the abuse in the Zenger case made that clear. We saw this one earlier. No excessive bail. 10 times the amount of money and assets Zenger owned. That essentially just kept him in jail because he couldn't afford it. These are 5 of the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. Half of the Bill of Rights go back to the Zenger case. Now, if you're looking for days to celebrate our Constitution, I just thought I'd tell you there, son. It was ratified on September 17th, 1789. That's known as Constitution Day. The First Amendment was proposed to the Bill of Rights, I believe, on September 25th, and it's officially known as First Amendment Day. A nonpartisan group, I just threw this in, designates the 3rd full week of October as Free Speech Week. That's a great excuse for a party. And then Bill of Rights Day, I believe, was the day it was ratified. I might have that wrong. But look at all those wonderful days we can have parties. On the 250th anniversary of John Peter Zenger's acquittal, Reagan was in office. And probably with the help of staff, they decided to put this together. He declared how important Zenger was. One of the landmark events of American legal history, a symbol of our nation's continuing commitment to maintaining freedom of the press. President Ronald Reagan said this in Proclamation 5360, Freedom of Press Day, August 4th, 1985. We don't annually celebrate August 4th, 1985. August 4th every year is Freedom of the Press Day. We have these other days that I just showed you. But what I'm interested in is this one. This is going to be the 300th day of the start of the trial, the running of the trial, the jury reaching a conclusion, and finding Zenger not guilty. If there is anything I want to do on this day, it is I want to be standing at Federal Hall on this day to celebrate this incredible moment. And so when that day happens, I really hope that I am not in Highlands Ranch. Again, I am going to be in New York, down here on the island of Manhattan, on the tip of it, at this little tiny building
over here, and then I'll come back to you.
You mentioned a book.
Pardon?
You mentioned some of this information is in a book.
It's in a book. What they wanted this to get out. And so John Peter Zenger in 1736 publishes a book of this. Now really, it's ghostwritten. Andrew Hamilton, his lawyer, probably wrote it all and wrote it as if it was a first-person account by Zenger. But Zenger publishes all of this in a book, and it is pure hell to read. First of all, the language is almost 300 years old, which stops a lot of people, just like Shakespeare does. On top of this, can you imagine reading a legal brief today? But now take the legal brief back 300 years, mix it with that language and legal terms we don't know, and it is absolute hell to read. But it really is it's an incredible blow-by-blow account of the entire trial. That's why I can show so much of it to you. Thank you.
You mentioned National Treasure more than once.
Yeah.
Are you making fun of the movie? Do you appreciate the history or the lack of history?
I have fun with both. You know, by the way, if you've ever seen the Declaration of Independence, you can't read it anymore in the National Archive. The ink is faded so much, which is really sad. But that's not the original. And by the way, they've never signed it all at a table, as John Trumbull shows them all signing. They signed it, they voted, they sent it to the printer, it got sent out, and they got the hell out of town. Because they were now committing treason and were facing death penalty if they got caught. The one that is signed by everybody that's in the National Archive, a courier goes around all 13 states, tracks them down and has them sign it, and then goes to the next state and tracks them down. They never all signed it at once.
This was a very good presentation, but why is it that this hasn't been known much more research about it? I never heard that name.
I don't know. Again, this was popular in American history through the 19th century, and it was top news up there with Common Sense and the Bible, you know, in the 18th century. And like I said, they appreciated it in 1952 when CBS did this movie. Well, one of these days, I'm expecting to see a movie, Zenger. You know, because this needs to be made, and I'm sure I'm going to see it in my lifetime.
All right, do we have one more question? Going gone. Apparently everyone wants to go for the giveaways. Well, let's give an extra round of applause for our speaker first. Thank you very much.
By the way, if you ever do go to New York, realize how much is there. There's so many incredible things in New York that you just want to see, that you can just go and see while you're there, including the place where you can go. You can go see the place. I'm trying to find it now. You can actually go see the place where Abraham Lincoln actually delivers a speech that gets him the presidency. I mean, there's so much history in New York. And, you know, I will go for Broadway shows, but I'll be going for the history too. You know, just go on history trips. This is fun stuff.
How are you doing that?
I just spend a lot of time on the toilet reading and playing with my laptop. My wife's like, "What are you doing?" "I'm in the bathroom." "Are you on the laptop again?" Yeah, I just get to know the country based on geography. It's just become an obsessive, compulsive, fun habit of mine. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you for letting me share something with you.
All right. Thanks,